Hi, everyone. Welcome to this latest VFX Artifacts podcast. My name's Ian Fales. I'm the editor of beforesandAfters.com. And today, the VFX artifact we're discussing is the Alpha channel. And who better to talk about that with me than one of the inventors of the Alpha, Alvy Ray Smith. Hi, Alvy. How are you?
I was afraid, Ian, that you're going to call me an artifact.
That wouldn't be a very good start, Alvy, would it?
It's approximately true.
Alvy, it's very hard to introduce you because there's so many things that you've done in your career. But if people don't know, you're the co-founder of Pixar.
Right.
You were also the first director of computer graphics at Lucasfilm,
Right.
and the first graphics fellow at Microsoft as well. You've
Right.
got 2 SciTech Awards, Academy Awards,
Right.
and you've also just written a book.
Indeed, I have a biography of the pixel.
Yes, I want to talk to you about that first before we get into the Alpha channel. A biography of the pixel. Alvy, if you had to summarize really briefly what that was, could you do it?
I'm not sure. There's a lot between the covers. But let me just say the motivation was to realize that we are now, all of us, swimming in an ocean of zettapixels, and nobody knows what they are. I ask people what a pixel is, and I get these really awkward, they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Answers.
Yeah.
And I said, isn't that weird? This is sort of all pictures in the world are now digital, made of pixels. And because of the digital explosion, nearly all pictures that have ever existed are digital. It just doesn't seem right not to know about the elementary particle, the pixel. So the book starts out, and by the way, most people just have it wrong. A lot of people think they're little squares, little abutting squares. They never were little abutting squares ever. So I try to tear that myth apart, but I also start with the science. No math. I stay clear of math, but I present the ideas intuitively, starting with Joseph Fourier and the structure of his idea that everything is music. It's all made of, you just add waves together, different frequencies, and you get sound and pictures in movies. Okay, and then along comes the sampling theorem that rides on the shoulders of Fourier to give us the sample of audio or pictures. The sample for pictures is called a pixel. A sample is a point sample. It has no dimension. You can't see a pixel. Here's the first surprise. Most people think you can see them. You can't see a pixel until you display it on a screen. The act of display is the other half of the sampling theorem that tells us how to get from the samples to the original signal they represent. And to make a long story short, that little blob of colored light that you see all over your screen, your display screen, those little blobs are the reconstruction filters, or spreaders, I call them, pixel spreaders required by the sampling theorem. So the important point is pixels are not the same thing as display elements, those little glowy spots on the screen. Pixels are discrete, digital, separated, spiky things. Display elements are soft, glowy, overlapping, continuous analog things. For some reason, people call those things on the screen pixels, and it's just wrong. They're completely different kinds of things. So one of the first things I try to do is just set it straight. What pixels are, they're a tremendously powerful idea, but they aren't to be confused with the display element.
Right. Well, Alvy, I'm hooked already. I mean, full disclosure, I've pre-ordered the book, which is out on the 3rd of August, I believe, just in time for SIGGRAPH. That was very good timing, Alvy.
Well, I think so, but I don't believe it was on purpose, believe it or not.
How did you come to write this book? Because I believe it's been quite a long project.
Yes, well, I started approximately 10 years ago in Melbourne, of all places.
Melbourne.
I got invited down to Melbourne by Sean Cubitt, who is a professor of media arts, you might say.
Mm.
And he invited me down to give a talk on the taxonomy of digital light. And I didn't know what that meant, but I like the term digital light. In fact, that was originally the title of my book. I've always been looking for a word that was bigger than computer graphics, that included image processing, parking meters, my Tesla dashboard, weather satellite stuff, VR. You know, what's the all-inclusive term? Well, digital light is the term I propose. Any picture made of pixels, no matter what use. So I presented this talk to other media arts types, and it was well received. And I realized they were hungry to know what a pixel was.
Mm.
They just didn't know. And you can't hypothesize and theorize and historicize if you don't know what the basic element is. So I went, gee, who else in the world knows this better than I do? Why don't I write this up? So I started delving into the histories, and immediately I found out the received histories of almost every aspect of the pixels are wrong. They tend to be narratives. We human beings love these simple narratives of some heroic individual from whom all things flow. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
In fact, it's just wrong in so many ways. So I tell the true stories of Fourier, the true story. Who invented the sampling theorem? Do you want to take a stab at that one?
Oh, I wouldn't have a clue. So you're going to have to tell me.
Everybody in America thinks it's Claude Shannon.
Oh, right. Yep.
He was one of the great geniuses of America, but he never even claimed he did it. It turns out it was a Russian communist.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't give that guy credit, right? Not in the Cold War. No. So, but
yeah.
His name is Vladimir Katelnikov, and his story is astonishing. So I spent a chapter telling the story of this man who lived through the entire Soviet nightmare, the KGB tried to throw him into the gulag twice, but he was saved by a woman protectress, Valeria Golubtsova, who could protect him because her family was close with Lenin, and she was married to Georgy Malenkov, who was the premier who took over just after Stalin.
Wow.
That's the guy who brought us the pixel. He proved the sampling theorem as we use it today, all nuances included. And of course, nobody in America's heard of this guy. Well, his story is tremendous. Everything about, he led the space race. He came to America once in 57, I think it was. And he told us they were going to put up a satellite. He told us about Sputnik 2 months before they put it up. And he said, we will broadcast at these two frequencies, which were the two Sputnik. He told Americans what they were going to do. They didn't believe him.
Right.
Russians couldn't possibly be that far along, right? So this guy's story is just astonishing. And at one of the last pictures I have of him, Putin's got his arm around him, knighting him in the Kremlin on the 70th anniversary of his proof of the sampling theorem. In Russia, they know who proved the sampling theorem. So I tell the story of this guy because it's just it's a wonderful story.
Alvy, your book's
chapter 2.
Your book's starting to sound like an HBO historical series. Have you sold the rights yet?
It probably could be, yeah. And somewhere I have to, since my life has been digital movies, I ride that wave in, but it's not a history of digital movies, although there is a history of digital movies in there. It's not a history of Pixar, but there is a history of Pixar in there. It's not a history of computer graphics. I try to tell the story of the whole damn thing, digital light, using the part I know best as an armature from which you can hang all the rest of it, and just give people the tools they need to put structure to this vast domain.
Yeah. But just on that, when does your research or work first kind of start appearing in the history of the pixel?
Well, it would be Xerox PARC. At Xerox PARC, it was before that, but I didn't quite know it at the time. My first job, I started out at working on a PhD at Stanford University in 1965 on this new subject called AI.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
I was just completely fascinated by the AI. And I applied to the two schools I knew that had it, Stanford and MIT. Stanford gave me more money. I went to Stanford. But after a couple of years, I said, I don't think this is going to happen in my lifetime. So I started looking around for something that I could
Mhm.
actually do, like make the first movie. Okay. So uh, my first job out as a new professor out of Stanford was at New York University with a fellow named Herb Freeman. Well, it turns out Herb Freeman had been saved from the Nazis by Albert Einstein,
Oh, wow.
and his specialty was computer graphics. And he knew I was a painter. I painted pictures with oils and acrylics growing up, and he thought, "Oh, here's a guy who'll be interested in computer graphics, right? He's an artist, he's a computer guy." And he kept trying to beg me to, why don't you, Alvy, why don't you start researching in computer graphics? And I said, Herb, if you ever get color, I will. Everything then was black and white.
Right.
And so sure enough, just a few years later, my best friend Dick Schaub invited me into his lab at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, and I saw my first color pixels, and that changed everything. It was Super Paint, and I went, "Oh, it's a paint program. That's what I do. It's computers. That's what I do. This is me. This is what I do from
Yeah.
now on."
That must have been a revelation for you and really spurred you on.
It was, you know, it's like sometimes you just feel like you've been grabbed by the back of the neck and you're going here next, buddy.
Right. So, Alvy, how did that then progress to your work at NYIT? And this is now leading up to the Alpha Channel, because that was work done with Ed Catmull.
Right.
How did that sort of arise, the early stages of that work with Ed?
Well, Xerox PARC got me started, but they fired me because they decided not to do color.
Oh.
Believe it or not.
Mm.
They hauled me in and said, "We made a corporate decision to go black and white." And I went, "Okay, bye." And I went to visit University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And, I had hair down to my small of my back, and my buddy David DeFrancisco had hair out to here. We tried not to act like we were artists, but we were, and they could tell that we weren't Defense Department funding material at University of Utah. But while we were there, somebody said, a rich man just came through from Long Island off New York City and bought one of everything in sight. And I said, "Did he buy the frame buffer?" The frame buffer was the secret piece of equipment that we needed. We would now call it a color chip, except it was the size of a refrigerator then, right?
Yeah.
It was pixel memory is what it is. We had the first one. I worked on the first one. It actually wasn't the first one, but I thought it was until I wrote this book.
Right.
At Xerox PARC. And we went looking for the second one. We thought it was the second one. And we found it. Utah, Evans and Sutherland in Utah were building the next frame buffer. And the first customer was this crazy man on Long Island, whose name was Alexander Schur. He was first of my three patrons. The first being himself, Alexander Schur, George Lucas, and Steve Jobs, who paid the way. But Alexander Schur had an animation studio on his campus on Long Island.
Right.
An old-fashioned cell animation. He was making Tubby the Tuba the old-fashioned way.
Oh yeah.
Hand drawings, inked onto celluloid, opaque paints painted on the back, stacked up on a camera stand and a picture taken. Next frame. Okay. Had about 100 people on this campus. So he basically wanted us to use the computers that he just bought from Evans and Sutherland to help him make Tubby the Tuba faster and cheaper and make more money. Okay.
Right.
Well, he was way ahead of the curve. he had the right idea that sooner or later computers are going to help out animation. It just wasn't the time yet. But he bought us everything we asked for. Now, New York Tech, I've got to tell you, is this beautiful set of estates on the North Shore of Long Island, mansions. So video was in one mansion, computer graphics was in another mansion.
Mm.
My girlfriend lived in another mansion. Me and my buddies lived in a fourth mansion. It was the extremely wealthy, beyond belief wealthy North Shore of Long Island. You know, I'd get up, I'm a kid from New Mexico, and I'd get up pinching myself. Is this a movie? This
Is
doesn't
this
seem
real?
real. And old Alex Schurer, Uncle Alex, we called him, would come through. You never knew. 3 a.m, 5 p.m, to midnight. He'd just come through, talking, just talking.
Mm.
And one day he set me down. He said, "We have the best computer graphics in the world, don't we?" And I said, "Yeah, we do." He said, "Well, how do we stay there?" I said, "Well, if you buy, we have this 512 by 512 8-bit pixel memory frame buffer that cost him $80,000, by the way.
Oh, back then. Wow.
$80,000
Mm.
in 1975 dollars.
Mm.
If you buy us 2 more of these, I can gang them together and have 24-bit pixels. And the difference is 256 colors versus 16 million colors. And I think I'm explaining this, but I'm not sure it's going in, you know. So with 16 million colors, you can do anything. And we'd be the first people in the world to have it. And that'll keep us out on the edge. So he wanders off. I don't know whether he's got it or not. A few weeks later, he walks in. You can't believe this guy. He walks in, he says, "You know what, Alvy? I bought you 5 more of those 8-bit thingies, so you'd have 2 of those 24-bit thingies."
Right.
He bought us 2 RGB frame buffers. The first one cost him $200,000. The second one cost him $180,000. And if you, that's just shy of $2 million in today's money, just on my say so.
Goodness.
This is one of those like godsends. I look back at, that really happened. It did. It really happened. We were living in a mansion, working in a mansion. The guy was supplying us with, we were working with artists so we could see how we learned how to do animation. And it's while we were watching these guys, these animators, old-fashioned animators, we got the ideas that we ought to make the first digital movie. We could be the first people to do that. And that's where we had the vision, that not knowing it would take 20 years to execute.
It's incredible.
75, and Toy Story came out in 95, so 20 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff in between, right? All right, so, and then Alex Schurer bought us 12 more frame buffers. So we had 18 8-bit frame buffers, and we could gang them together in all sorts of ways. More pixel memory than anybody in the world. And I point out that all of that memory falls within just a small piece of the screen of a cell phone today.
Yeah, it's
and
madness
it cost him,
to think about.
Added it all together, it's almost $4 million that he spent.
Right.
So we would have that memory. And we went bananas. We just went crazy making art. Nobody had ever seen anything, RGB anything before, right? I rewrote all the code into RGB mode. I wrote the first RGB paint program, So one day, Ed came to me, and Ed Catmull came to me. I met Ed at this place, and he was trying to solve the perennial problem of computer graphics, the hidden surface problem. What can a virtual camera see and not see? Which of the polygons in the model can it see? Because rendering a polygon was incredibly expensive at the time. You didn't want to render one if you didn't have to. So figuring out what was hidden was there were a whole bunch of people who had different algorithms. And Ed had a new one. He was trying to approach it on if you divide the world up by a window screen, and so into a bunch of little abutting squares, and just look inside of the abutting square and solve the hidden surface problem inside that abutting square, in one square of the window screen, and then move to the next one. That was his way of solving the hidden surface problem.
Right.
So he came to me and said, Alvy, I'd like to be able to render a foreground against an arbitrary background. As it was, he had a single fixed background wired into his code, and he wanted to be able to take that wired in background away and put in any background.
Right.
So we sat and chatted for a while, and all of a sudden we saw the solution. And the reason we could see the solution and nobody else had before was because we had more memory than anybody else on the planet. So
Yeah.
it was real easy to say, oh, I could just add a fourth channel. You can tell me what the opacity is inside your little geometric squares, what the final color will be and what its opacity will be. And we'll write that opacity value. We'll write the color value into the usual pixels. We'll write the opacity into this fourth channel called alpha. Hence, we just tacked on another frame buffer from the 12 we had. And overnight we did this. I rewrote all the save and restore routines to know about 4 channels instead of 3. I wrote up a Unix manual page and even used the term alpha, and RGBA is the name of the pixel. And Ed rewrote his code overnight so that he just wrote, he honored the new format. So he had the opacity written into the 4th channel. And then I would bring in my new reader. I would bring in into a frame buffer, an RGB picture, and then I would open one of Ed's new files and use the alpha channel to correctly add, composite his pixel value to what was already in the frame buffer.
Okay. Alvy, you feel like
it was trivial.
Yeah.
We did it overnight.
I was gonna say it feels like you did it overnight. Did you call it the alpha channel overnight?
Yeah, we called it alpha. And the reason we called it alpha, well, the way you composite one image with another is you linearly interpolate one to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And linear interpolation, the formula that we use for linear interpolation, we shortened it to LERP, by the way. We LERPed one picture to another all the time. The formula for LERP is 1 minus alpha A plus alpha A plus 1 minus alpha B, where A and B are the foreground and background images. It was the Greek letter alpha. That's just the form we used. It could have been tau or zeta or X or anything, right? But we happen to always use alpha. So it was just natural that when I wrote it up, I called it alpha, spelled out, of course. And now what's weird is that neither Ed nor I had any idea how profound this invention turned out to be. It just was a simple solution to get one of his pictures over an arbitrary background. So a few years later, Tom Porter and Tom Duff added an algebra to the alpha channel and came up with some clever tricks on how to make, multiplications in those days still cost a lot. So we came up with a trick of pre-multiplying the pixel by its alpha channel and storing pre-multiplied pixel values. So you didn't have to do those multiplications. They were already done.
Right. Was that later work by Thomas Porter and Tom Duff?
Yeah, that was done
at Lucasfilm.
That was done at Lucasfilm.
Right.
So the 4 of us got an Academy Award for that. That's one of my SciTech awards. Okay. But that wasn't the end of it, right?
Yeah.
It took me a lot of years before I finally figured out what the heck we had actually done. What we had done with this notion of pre-multiplied alpha was get rid of the rectangle. We had overthrown the tyranny of the rectangle in pixel pictures. When you get a 0 alpha, you can't get back to anything that might have been there before. So the pixels that have non-zero alpha are the image. The rest of it, you don't care what it is. Just ignore it. You've got shaped pixels. You got shaped pictures, excuse me. I call them sprites. And once you have sprites, you can do all kinds of glorious things. So when I finally left Pixar, I started a second company based on that fundamental notion that pictures did not have to be rectangles and you could do all kinds of amazing things. And that's what Microsoft bought.
Right, right. Alvy, just to go back just a little step, my own understanding sometimes of the alpha has probably in the past been confused by my understanding of, and this is in a visual effects context, mats. And I think occasionally some people are confused about the relationship between mats and the alpha channel. Can you
They're the same
describe
thing.
that a
They're
little
the same thing.
Mm.
They're the same thing. The
Okay.
alpha channel is a mat.
Okay.
It's where it's zero, where alpha is zero.
Yep.
The foreground object is transparent. It's a mat.
Okay.
And it's got partial. Yeah, it's a mat. Now, the matting, and I spent years trying to disentangle the various mat terminologies that came out of the filmmaking world.
Mm.
You know, that traveling mats and holdout mats and this kind of mat and that kind of mat. It all boils. I mean, you can represent any of that with the alpha channel and appropriate operations. So the alpha channel just simplified all of that.
Right.
And you wouldn't have, well, everything assumes alpha channels now, like Windows even uses alpha channel, right?
Yeah.
So you can float rectangles with rounded corners and semi-transparencies over the rest of the desktop. It's used everywhere.
I mean,
can't imagine not having it.
Yeah, no. I'm interested in that, in adoption since 1977 and perhaps also since that extra work by the two Toms. What do you remember about the adoption of your relatively simple alpha research? Like, what did the industry just go, oh yeah? What do you remember with the ensuing years?
I don't have strong memory, but I think it pretty much is, oh yeah, this is the way to go, and just did it.
Yeah.
Right.
Meaning it got implemented into paint programs and just workflows.
Oh yeah.
And
you know, meanwhile, Moore's law is doing its thing. So my second company, Altamira, was based on the notion that you could have these objects that were pixel objects, but they had shape and you could move them around in real time. Now that sounds trivial now, but then the computers were just getting fast enough that became a reality. And nobody had seen it before, and that's why I had a product that was saleable. You know, everybody else is riding that same curve. In the bad old days, early paint programs, you just laid down copies of a so-called paintbrush, just every time just as fast as you could. And often you could beat the computer. If you stroked really fast, you'd get a bunch of separated dots on the screen. And then people, of course, said, well, let's render a paint stroke. Well, rendering takes time. Well, you know, Moore's law gave us the horsepower, and before long, people were rendering. And so Tom Porter, who's one of the two Toms, when I hired him at Lucasfilm to write the paint program because I knew he understood paint programs, he wrote the first 32-bit paint program at Lucasfilm, so that a paint stroke had an alpha channel and you could reuse the strokes anywhere you wanted to. I mean, all this stuff just becomes so obvious once you have it. Yeah,
yeah, so obvious, Alvy.
Well, it is. It's easy. It really is easy. You know, I make the joke that we were like the first guys on we were the first explorers on a new island. So we got to name everything. We got to pick the low hanging fruit, and
yeah,
we were there first.
I meant to ask you, and it's something you might not remember. Do you actually remember what imagery Ed and yourself first created when you did this overnight alpha development?
Well, we were making pictures separately. He was rendering some, probably measure for measure is a piece we were working on for Alex Shure at the time, over a background, maybe, but I really don't remember what he did. I went crazy making. So I had a National Endowment for the Arts grant, which is the reason I was even at New York Tech, was because my friend David DeFrancisco and I had applied for a grant from the NEA that depended on having a frame buffer.
Mhm.
But Xerox PARC fired me and we lost our frame buffer access. So we had cast our lots together. I had to find the next one. And that's why I found my way to New York Tech. There it was. So we start generating art. I've got thousands of pictures I could show you. They're just, well, it's art. It's hard to describe. They're not of
Yeah.
objects or things. They're concepts. And
I will, yeah, I will say here.
Well, I just remember
everyone, go ahead, Alvy.
I'm interrupting you now. Go ahead.
I know. I was only going to say to everyone, and I'll put this in the show notes. Everyone should go to Alvy's website, which is alvyray.com, where you really do have a lot of this history there and imagery. And you know, you could spend hours on your website, Alvy. I think I have over the years. So that's
good. That's what it's for.
Yeah, but sorry, you were saying something else there.
Oh, I was just trying to remember some of the early things that David DeFrancisco and I, he's my artist friend, who we were together. We've been together the whole time. We did a series, I remember, where we took powerful symbols like the A-bomb explosion and Stonehenge and worked them together in different composites to create art with a punch. And we had, we did maybe 20 variations on that theme. That's just one idea that springs to mind that things we did.
Right. I haven't a VFX related question for you as the co-inventor of the Alpha channel. Have you followed closely since the 80s the development of compositing software? Do you tend to check it out just out of interest and see how, Nuke is approaching it, or Shake did it, or even how ILM's own proprietary things was doing it in the 80s?
I'm embarrassed to say that I have not followed it closely. For 10 years, I've been researching this book.
I only bring that up because
Katelnikov.
only because I think compositors listening to this will, if they didn't know that you were such an integral part of the Alpha channel, they're using Nuke every day, and there it is, and of course it's in so many other tools too, of course. Yeah.
No, it's one of those things I'm just exceedingly proud of, but I can't say that there was much genius involved.
Well,
I guess that I'd like to detract from my own statement a little bit, is that over the decades, I have finally realized the full profundity of the idea. And it was way beyond what any of us thought. And it wasn't until I crafted my product for Altamira software that finally struck me just how ferociously profound this concept was.
Right. Because at the time, I'm guessing there were academic papers that were probably released, and Ed Catmull clearly had one about the hidden surface algorithm in 78, I think. But did you document this? Did you try and patent it at all? Was that on your mind to do anything like that?
No, we just didn't think like that. We were, in fact, I'm kind of shocked. I look back at it, how little money meant to us, right? Now Alex Sure would have loved to patent all this stuff, but we didn't want him to have patents on it, right? We wanted it to belong to the world. And we ended up getting 1 or 2 patents with him, but we didn't think they were that interesting a patent. But for like Alpha channel, that's just so easy. It's hard to, it's one of those cases where you don't know. I've got burnt by the patent system so many times in my life that, I've fought patent cases through the courts. I protected Photoshop in a major patent case, that I wouldn't let my people patent hardly anything. unless it truly was non-obvious to those practiced in the art. That's the
Yeah.
US patent law definition. Most patents don't qualify. They're to people qualified in practice in the art, they're obvious. But the patent system sets it up so that the courts have to fight that out. They don't have peers review patents, right? So
Yes, of course. Oh, well, I mean, I'm glad that you all did this for the good of the industry and community. It actually is a really great thing.
well, it's one of the parts that people always puzzled about Ed and me. I remember one Japanese businessman sitting us down one day and saying, "You let your people publish?" We said, "Well, yeah, we kind of have to.
Mm.
We want the hottest geniuses in the business, and that's how they get their reward. They don't get it from money or stock. They get it from accolades from their peers. That's that form of fame is their main payment in life, and we have to let them." There ever so often there'll be an idea we say, "No, that one, don't." But very seldom did we ever invoke that. I
Yeah.
invoked it for the distributed ray tracing algorithm at the foot of RenderMan, because that was a completely when I went to work for Microsoft tried to get me to break that patent. I said, "I can't. I wouldn't let that patent happen if it was breakable." And so they hauled in Jim Kajia and Jim Blinn, some other hot researchers that were working at Microsoft at the time, and both of them said, "We tried to solve that problem and we couldn't either." Those guys really did a number. Some of the geniuses at Pixar. That was worthy of a patent.
Right, absolutely. Well, Alvy, it's so much fun tracing the history of the Alpha channel and talking about your other work. Was there anything else about the Alpha development that you desperately wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
I don't think so. That's pretty much it. You got the story of crazy Alex Shure. One thing I didn't tell you about Alex Shure was he didn't talk like you and I are talking right now, where there's sort of an exchange. You say something, I say something, back and forth, back and forth. He would just come in talking, just this stream of consciousness. And at first I didn't know what to do until I said, "Well, I'll just start talking too and see what happens." So I would start talking. And then I would notice that, oh, he's now saying some of the things that I said. I think that means the thought transferred. Right. If my words are now coming out of his mouth. So in telling that story, I didn't tell you all that part, which makes it, the communications were really difficult. So when I said I didn't know whether he really understood 256 colors versus 16 million colors, what that difference was, and because it was all transferred through this Casey Stengel. Well, that won't mean anything to you. We called it word salad.
Okay.
Just words, right?
Oh, I
but
love it.
He was one of probably the craziest or the boldest of our three patriarchs along the way, and he lost everything.
Okay. Well,
so I'm trying to bring his stature back up in my book, because he was it was really important what he did. It's kind of hard to believe what a boost he gave us, and we rode that boost right into Pixar. So
absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing those details, Alvy, and everyone should, of course, check out A Biography of the Pixel, released on August 3. And I'm also going to suggest people should try and find, unless I've got this wrong, Alvy, you wrote back for American Cinematographer a description of the Genesis sequence work done at Lucasfilm.
At the time, I wrote it at the time too.
Yes.
So it turns out to be one of the best pieces of documentation. We often were going so fast, we just never stopped and wrote things down.
Yeah. I wrote it down.
I said,
yeah.
And sure enough, as I was preparing my book, I had to go back and I would read that document. I said, "Oh my God, I forgot all about blank, 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 and blank." Right. But there it is in hard, cold type.
It's a
set down at
read.
the time.
Yes, Alvy, I love reading that piece, and it's such an amazing sequence, the Genesis sequence. You must be really proud of that still to this day.
Oh, indeed. And the way we got this, the right to do the sequence is a good story. It's in the book too. But I mean, basically, George Lucas, when he hired us, we thought, oh, he's going to put us in his movies. We will be content providers in George's movies.
Mm.
Surely that's why he wants us. Now, he didn't actually say so. What he said was, I want you to digitize the optical printer and the audio editor and the film editor. And okay, we said, okay, we know how to do that. Those are the dues we'll pay to get to make pieces in the movies. And so I started hiring the best people in the world. And they all thought, like I did, that we were there to be in the movies. Now I just got these amazing geniuses signing up right and left. Lauren Carpenter and Bill Reese and Tom Duff and Tom Porter, just everybody. So I waited and waited, and George never came and knocked on my door. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, he hasn't a clue what he's got. He thinks we're a bunch of technoids who only know how to do hardware and software. We thought we had been very clear, but somehow that message hadn't gone through. So it was only Star Trek II coming in the door, Paramount, not Lucasfilm, and asking for special effects for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, that opened George's mind. So they called me in, the producers of Star Trek II called me in and proposed the Genesis demo. There's a whole story about that, but basically when we got the project and I brought the team together, I says, okay, we've got our big break on the big screen. This is it. We had a 60-second shot and we're going to make it everybody in Star Trek II land happy. Paramount's going to be happy. This will make complete narrative sense. But what it really is a 60-second commercial to George Lucas so that he knows what the hell he's got. And I knew one secret. And to this day, I still don't know how I knew this secret. Probably one of his TDs told me that George is always aware of the cameraman, always. And when you think about it, if you're watching the cameraman, the director's lost you. You basically failed as a director if you're not if the emotion hasn't grabbed you. So I guess George can do both. He can stay with the emotion and track the camera at the same time, but most people can't do it. But I knew he's tracked the camera. I says, we're going to put a camera shot in this piece that no real camera could possibly do. It won't be gratuitous computer graphics 101, wowie zowie. It'll make perfect narrative sense, but he'll know because he's watching that no real camera can do it. And that's what we did. And that's what Genesis demo is. It's got an extremely elaborate camera move, cameras twisting up and down, swinging around and doing all kinds of stuff. And sure enough, the day after the premiere, George stepped one foot in my office. He's kind of shy.
Yeah.
And he said, great camera move. He was gone. and he had us briefly in the next Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right.
No, wrong.
No,
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi. Of course. Sorry. Yeah. Right. Yes. I mean that Genesis sequence, just the use of fractals, but also the move and how it really is a storytelling point rather than anything gratuitous is really neat about it.
So what I did was I had a rock band, right? I said, well, I've got Lauren Carpenter on fractals. I've got Tom Duff on bump maps. I've got Bill Reeves on particle systems, like that. And I just designed a shot that had all those things in it and satisfied, I thought, their need for turning death into life instantaneously. Took me a minute.
Oh, I love it. I love that we could talk about that sequence, Alvy. That's so cool. One of my favorites. Well, thank you for joining me for VFX Artifacts. Congratulations on the book. It was really fun to talk to you. Thank you so much again.
Good day.
Thanks, Alvy.